All right, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. It's your good friend Plausible here, and I'm back in action with another look back at another forgotten classic. You know, this is one of my favorite categories when it comes to doing this job because what it is, it's remembering a time and remembering a movie that has been forgotten through the annals of time and space and all that. With all the movies that are coming out all the time, it's important to remember some of these movies. Now, this particular movie requires a very special kind of introduction. You need to understand some 80s philosophy, which will shock a lot of you because this movie came out in 1991, you know. But remember, because it was still, only the very early 90s, the 80s were still very much in the consciousness of the people. We were still making movies in that kind of setting, in that kind of environment. Now, the other thing you have to remember is that this stuff is mostly my opinion. There's not really much research or fact checking. It's just something that I believe from my experience and what I saw growing up in the 80s. And that is, 80s was the time of the genre, okay? Today it's about franchises. We're not making the all female Ghostbusters all by itself. We want Ghostbusters 2, 3, and 4. We want to sell toys. We want to merchandise the hell out of it. That's today. Today we're used to the superhero movies that's gonna tie into that superhero movie and this superhero movie. We don't really want to do the standalone movie in this day and age like we did back in the 80s. In the 80s, as long as it was part of a genre, we were happy. And for me, one of my personal favorite genres was the martial arts genre, which really was about watching an acrobatic show more than anything else. It was amazing to see these people do these kicks and punches, and of course, they could defeat the enemy, they could defeat the bad guy, who, 9 times out of 10, was a drug dealer. Very rarely did you have any other occupation or anything like that. They were coming to bring in drugs, they would beat the crap out of them, and then the world was free from drugs, I guess. I don't know. Chuck Norris did that a lot, and even this particular movie was forgotten, and that movie was The Perfect Weapon. Now, The Perfect Weapon was came out in 1991, and it's a movie that was based off of the first movie of the new star. Now, Jeff Speakman had done other acting roles. You might see him in Lionheart with Jean-Claude Van Damme, or some of his other. He only did like 4 movies before this one. This was his big starring breakout role. Now, for some reason, when it comes to, whoops, sorry, wrong, too early about that one. When it comes to these movies, whether it's Jean-Claude Van Damme or Steven Seagal, they always seem to want to start off with their life story for some reason. Um, Also, this is the late 80s. I mean, actually, it's early 90s. But the point is, at this time, people were getting tired of the Chuck Norrises, and Bruce Lee had passed by now for over 15 years ago or so. But the point is, we were ready for the fresh blood to come in, and the Steven Seagal and the Jean Claude Van Damme were able to successfully reach a level higher than most people did. Whereas, and of course they fell from grace, but that's another story. But there were other people that were the wannabes, Now there's a middle layer, and those were the very close people. Now, if you're not at the level of the Jean Claude Van Dammes or the Steven Seagals, this part here is all opinion, okay? Like for me, the Cynthia Rothrock's, sorry, I mispronounced that name, I do apologize, but she was one of the wannabes. She actually did a lot of movies over here, overseas, very good looking, but boy, watching her try to act, yeah. And some people liked it, some people didn't, to each his own. But the point I'm trying to make is there were those people that didn't make it, that came so close. And one of those people was Jeff Speakman. Now, the other thing you have to remember when it comes to 80s philosophy is that back in those days, we were still very heavily into your style was your life type of thing. As a matter of fact, I do believe it was from the 80s, 90s, more than 90s, I should say, and the new millennium, that we got away from this whole you commit yourself to the style for your whole life. If you ever want to see that in action, watch the Bruce Lee movie Dragon. And there's a scene where Bruce Lee goes to the Ed Parker's tournament, does a demonstration, and at the same time he he promotes the idea that you don't have to be subjected to a style. You know, you have to remember something about the human race, okay, in general. When you are committed to something, and especially back in the day, like 80s and before, when you were a part of something, that was your life, that was your identity. And you did not want anyone to tell you you were wrong. You didn't mind going to a tournament and having your ass handed to you, or going to a tournament and kicking ass because your style was the better style. And you might be wondering why I stayed on Ed Parker here. Ed Parker was a Kempo karate expert. They say he founded the American Kempo karate schools. Jeff Speakman was a Kempo karate expert in this movie. That was his style. And that's one thing you did with these movies. You made sure that your movie was based on your style. Okay, now we've all seen that. If you think of Steven Seagal, you think Aikido. Chuck Norris, karate, even though it was, I think, Tangsudo or Hapkido. I forget what his real style was, but it wasn't karate. But, you know, back in the 70s, if you could punch and kick and it wasn't kung fu, then you were karate. That's just how it was. You know, they didn't want to present you the idea of Tang Sudo or Taekwondo or anything else, or even the different versions of kung fu. They said, hey, look, if you are in a martial arts, it's karate. As a matter of fact, it's interesting, and I will digress here for just a second to talk about martial arts in the 80s. I really should just do the whole a talk on that. But it's interesting how there was always this style de jour for a while, if you know what I mean. Like, for example, we had the Karate Kid, so karate was very popular. Then we had ninjutsu movies, and ninjutsu was very popular. Then we had, Aikido, and today it's all Krav Maga. You know, so you know what I'm saying. If you people who watch martial arts movies know what I'm saying. But the reason why I'm bringing all of this up, and there was a method to my madness, is because we are introduced to Jeff Speakman, and the first thing we notice is that he's a construction worker. It didn't mean anything. We never see him go back there. And then he is in the apartment and he's practicing his martial arts. He's doing his Kempo karate form, which actually looked pretty good. Though, as a Taekwondo artist, his kicks were a little stiff. But that's for me back in the day. I was in Taekwondo. But the point is, he's just doing his Kempo karate and he's doing his form. He calls up an old friend of his, and you could tell that this was one of those moments where he sits down, he looks at the phone, and he's wondering, should I do it this time? And he says, this time he decides, screw it, I'm going to call. And so he finally calls Mako. Okay? The funny thing about this movie is that he's driving to meet his friend, because he heard his friend have some problems, and all of a sudden somebody rips the phone cord out of the wall. Now, I can't believe I have to do this. For those of you who don't know, before there were cell phones, back in 1991 and 1990, all our phones were connected to the wall. And so when you picked up the phone, there was a cord that went from the phone to the box, from the box to the wall. I can't believe I just had to do that. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that he was talking to the person on the phone. Next thing you know, somebody grabs the cord that's in the wall and rips it out. So he's really concerned about his friend, so he decides to drive over there to find out what's going on. And during this time, we're treated to his life story. How his mother died, how he was getting into fights, how his father didn't know what to do. But instead of sending him to the military school for discipline, let's give him self-discipline, martial arts training. This is one of those movies that, as you can probably tell, it was dedicated to Ed Parker. Because this was 1991 when the movie was released, and Ed Parker died in 1990. So finally, and yes, his name is Jeff in the movie as well. Jeff shows up, he fights some bad guys, and because he got involved a little bit, Mako said that not to worry, he will take care of anything until who should show up? Oh, only the best 80s bad guy ever, Tanaka, Professor Tanaka. Let me tell you something. The world has gone soft and no one is a threat. But in 1980s, this guy, he was the badass of badasses. He is 6'2", sumo wrestler, pound for pound, just humongous. Now, I know sometimes he's done humor. You know, he let himself get his ass kicked in Three Ninjas. But he also did some very serious roles. I mean, he was in Chuck Norris's Eye for an Eye. And if you ever needed a bad guy henchman that could define invincibility, well, here's your guy right here. He does show up and kill Mako. And this brings me to a funny part of the movie that I was going to come back to. Mako gives the story about coming over from Korea. And all of this is supposed to be happening, I guess, in Little Koreatown. And maybe we're supporting the very racist notion that all Asians look alike. But you have people saying, you know, oh, this person is Korean. But no, it's like, that's not Korean. He's obviously Japanese. Or I know that actor. He's obviously from Honolulu, you know? And so you get a lot of those people. And I'm not talking about just about Tanaka, just so you know. There's a whole other, not just Mako either. Even though Mako says, yeah, I came over here from Korea. It's like, Mako, you're Japanese. Hello. But the point is, there are like 5 or 10 other characters. Some of them have lines, some of them don't. But the point is, there's a lot of there's a lot of just saying that we're all Korean, even though some of them are clearly Japanese or Chinese or whatever. But anyway, I digress again. The movie itself moves on with him trying to solve the murder of his friend. Okay, and as expected, drug dealers are involved. Now, when it comes to the perfect weapon is the least perfect of all my forgotten classics. But that didn't mean it wasn't good. Jeff Speakman did what everyone was doing at that time, and that was kind of the problem. Now, the first problem also with the perfect weapon was that this was a time when the one-punch wonder was kind of losing steam. See, with the perfect weapon, it wasn't a question of what they did, it was a question of when they did it. And they were doing it in the 1991 when everything else had already gone past it. You know, we were already done with all this kind of stuff. He had it all, don't get me wrong. Had this movie been released 3 or 5 years earlier, it would have done gangbusters and people would have really liked it. But here you got your old-fashioned martial artist looking for revenge / justice as he goes through the investigation, fighting this guy, then that guy, then, you know, almost getting captured, but just being thrown out and leaving plot holes and questions that leave everyone wondering. What made the perfect weapon really good, though, was that it really followed the idea of the movie. Jeff Speakman's character, Jeff, was a tiger. He wanted to learn to be a dragon, though, but he wasn't learning to be a dragon yet. Here he was learning to be a tiger, which was reactive, which was just go to this guy, get the information. He doesn't want to give it to you, beat the shit out of him until he does, you know? The funny thing about this movie is all the times he messed up, and he messed up a lot in this movie, okay? If there was ever an imperfect hero, this is your guy. You know, he goes into a club wanting to get some answers and beat some guy up in front of everybody in the club. So naturally, everyone in the world starts to, you know, come after and fight this guy. He's our hero, but he's beating up just some random citizen as far as they're concerned. He was the villain, yeah, but deep down, he just wanted to, you know, get the information. Luckily for him, somebody had a plan. Somebody realized they could use him because he wasn't thinking. He was just reacting. And we're supposed to believe at the end of the movie, he does become the dragon. and he starts to think, even though it really wasn't done as eloquently as it would have been done today. Had this been movie made in this day and age, well, first off, he'd be more brooding. You wouldn't see him with all the weapons making the fascinating moves. You would have seen him standing on top of a roof looking down, contemplating, you know. But the thing is, when it comes to The Perfect Weapon, it was a movie for its time. And it was a movie that came out around after its time, if that makes sense. When these kind of movies, when these kind of genres were starting to fall away. You know, the martial arts genre is still around today in terms of other people's opinion, but it's not the same. It's not like it used to be. You know, it always reminds you of kind of like, the Chuck Norris effect. Yeah, you can have the earlier Chuck Norris movies where he walks into a bar or he walks into a little town, Breaker Breaker is the movie I'm referring to, and he just beats up everybody, and no one can really touch him. But then eventually, as time goes on, you put him in a bar and they actually, beat him up for a change, which is different compared to what we're used to. The timing of this movie was off, but it was trapped in that black hole when we didn't know how to make movies anymore. We didn't know how to improve the genres anymore. And instead of doing anything risky and or different, they decided to just go with the flow, do what they know, put in an action sequence, show a guy getting beat up in one scene and yet being fine the next scene, one-liners, a little bit of mystery, drugs, revenge, and a kid sidekick helper, and of course, a love interest. And let me end it with this. The love interest, first off, if you're a fan of CSI Special Victims Unit, no, see, Law and Order Special Victims Unit, I'm sorry, but, and I'm going to butcher her name, Mariska Hargitay, okay? She's the main star of Law and Order Special Victims Unit. This was one of her first movies when she was just like, I think she was not even 20 years old at the time. And don't quote me on that. I didn't do any research on that or anything. But she was in this movie, and she was the love interest. Never had a line in the whole movie. You saw her. I mean, it was so funny. Let me tell you something. Martial arts today, for me, is also kind of soft compared to what it was like back in the 90s. That's when I trained, was back in the 90s. And, in this show, the first thing they do to start their classes is they take their, they're in at attention or ready position, and then the lead guy just back fist somebody in the stomach, and they back fist somebody in the stomach. So there's Jeff, white belt, didn't know what was going on. Next thing you know, this girl just slams her fist into his stomach. She, of course, is cute. He, of course, is cute. So, of course, it's the love interest. That's all you needed back in the 80s. Okay? You didn't need any of this backstory, any of this complicated drama. She was good looking. He was good looking. They were going to get together. Okay? What is funny, I think there was this one moment. I know there's a deleted scene where he's at a funeral for a friend and she comes up and talks to him. Okay, they took it out because it kind of disrupted the flow of the movie. The movie knew what it wanted to be. It wanted to be a martial arts hunt for revenge movie, not a romance. And that's one thing I do respect about this movie, especially in this day and age, where we feel we have to break up the movie, break up the plot with a subplot. Okay, yes, you're out to avenge your friend who's been murdered. Well, let's not forget a love story. Yeah, right, we needed that. I think they did kind of break it up a little bit where he starts to talk and mentor the young boy. Very brief scene. But that's all we needed back in the 90s, Or it should be 80s. 80s. I almost want to say 80s. This came out in 1991, but it's so early in the 90s that the 80s mentality was still there, This simple movie. You're going to use your martial arts to get revenge. That's it. That's all. Done. And of course, because Ed Parker died a year before it was released, they dedicated this to his memory. This was actually this could have been like the best of the best, where it didn't really have to be about revenge or hunting for the bad guy. It could be about, finding the warrior within, awakening the dragon within, and making sure that, you don't always, the internal strength, as opposed to just being able to kick around a guy back and forth. Is the perfect weapon perfect? Not by any stretch of the imagination, but it was still good. It was still a fun time to be had. And yeah, let's be honest, it was better than anything Jess Beekman did afterwards with movies like Street Night or anything like that. But it was still a decent movie, and if you haven't seen it yet, just try them, as they say. Alright, guys, that's it for me for today. We'll see you at the theaters.